Hello, my name is Marie Sadu. I am back here with the ladies of Infinite Banking Canada Group with Kathleen Vandenberg and Mary Chow Ivanovic. We also have a special guest from Ontario, Margo Sage. And before we get into that discussion though, I do want to acknowledge that we're all wearing our favorite lipsticks. I see a few reds, pinks. I know I don't look very good in red, but the whole purpose of that is to acknowledge National Lipstick Day on July 29th, which everybody's going, what does that have to do with anything financial? Well, it actually has a few really good points. And so I wanted to actually point out a few pieces of history on lipstick. Turns out lipstick has not been used just as a beautifying technique, but has been a strong symbol for revolution, defiance, and strength. So before the late 19th century, women only applied makeup at home and was not acceptable for respectable women. It was associated with marginalized groups such as actors, and prostitutes. However, in 1912, feminists painted their lips as a sign of emancipation for the suffragette movement. And in the 1920s, flappers wore lipstick to symbolize their independence. In the 1930s, lipsticks was seen as a symbol of adult sexuality. And teenage girls believed that lipstick was a symbol of womanhood, yet the adults thought they were just being rebels. During the Great Depression, American women bought lipstick as one of the only affordable luxuries. And did you know that Winston Churchill kept lipstick in production to boost morale during World War II. And also, here's a big one. World War II lipstick became a sign of patriotism because supposedly Hitler hated red lipstick. And so the woman wore it to basically say na 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 poo poo to him. During the mid-40s, powers attempted to once again stymie lipstick, suggesting to teenagers that wearing cosmetics could ruin chances of popularity and a career for fear that they would be mistaken for loose or prostitutes. However, by the 1950s, beautiful Marilyn Monroe and Elizabeth Taylor brought back that dark red lip, which is fantastic. And a 1951 survey revealed that 2/3 of teenage girls wore lipstick. In the 1960s, lipstick was associated with femininity. And as we all know, Madonna ushered red lipstick back in as a symbol of strength and moxie. And when I looked up the word moxie, it is defined as aggressive energy, initiative, skill, know-how, but most importantly, the ability to face difficulty with spirit and courage. And to this day, nothing says that more than a strong red lip. So thanks, Kathleen and Mary and Margo, for wearing your strong lips. But I think it's a great segue into today's topic and guest, Margo Sage. She joins us from Ontario to discuss the wisdom that she acquired through her life experience and our theme of owning your financial security. She tells her beautiful story after loss in her recently released book, Ordinary Miracles. And after reading her story, I can definitely say that she faced difficulty with spirit and courage. And she is a good friend of Kathleen. And Kathleen, I'd love for you to speak a little bit about Margo and what made you bring her on.
Thank you. Yes, we were discussing amongst ourselves about the National Lipstick Day. And I immediately thought of bringing Margo on as a guest. Margo is a friend of mine. We both have cottages on the same lake. Mm-hmm. I had read her book, Ordinary Miracles. And, you know, as a financial planner, I kind of come at the book from some financial planning lessons, like not having a will and how women should really take ownership of their financial plan. But as a woman and as a human, it's absolutely a beautiful love story. And I just thought it really tied everything together. Margo and I were speaking, and it's not even just a love story. It's really 3 love stories. It's love of her first husband, Bain, and then her second husband, Mike, as well as self-love. And it is a tearjerker, and it's a beautiful story, and it's a true story. And yes, there's, you know, some great financial lessons to be learned, but it's also just an amazing story. So that's what really drove me to bring Margo on. And she's the author of the book, and you can find the book on her website, margosage.com, but I really want to bring her on to tell her personal story. Maybe Marina, I can have you read the book. What do you think of, what did you think of it?
Yeah, well, it's the first book I ever read where I was crying on the beach. I was like,
oh
my gosh. Anyways, the first 3 pages, explains what happened, which we'll have you tell in a moment, of you losing your husband and being left behind with a 4-month-old baby. But what got me and gave me that shivers, and I'll quote, you say, where do we live? What do we own? How can a single mom raise a child on her own? I had a million questions and no answers. And then you go on, and page 10, I was managing legal issues nonstop and learning about many things that I didn't want to know. I had been through hell and back a million times, dealing with grief, but also dealing with the estate and raising a baby. And, Margo, there's a well-known quote out there that says, one day you'll tell your story about how you overcame what you went through, and it'll be someone else's survival guide. And I definitely see this book as that. And I'm also a strong believer that adversity is a gift if we choose to see it as a gift. And what I love about this book is that it's not just helpful for those who are grieving the loss after the fact, but it serves as a gift for others to learn from. And so with that said, I would love for you to tell us, what happened, and as a result, what legal and financial issues you had to go through. But I would also love if you could share the emotional and the physical and spiritual impact that had on you and your son Wilkin, and at the most difficult time in your life. And lastly, your message for our audience. So I'm going to hand it over to you to tell us your beautiful story.
Thank you so much, Marina, and thank you, Kathleen. My story is not just, it's not just my own unique story. Sadly, this does happen to many people. And when I was 37 years old in 2007, I lost my 35-year-old husband. And we had had our child in July, and my heart was just massive at that point. I didn't know that I could love 2 people so much in my life. And 4.5 months later, at the exact same hospital, my heart completely broke. And I lost Bain, in the emergency ward, going from, maternity to emergency. And Bain died from anaphylactic shock and heart disease at the age of 35. And he made his own way to the hospital. We were just planning for a Christmas photo shoot at home. It was, late November. And he called me and said he had no nut allergy. And he called and said, Margo, I've just ingested a cashew. Fine, I'm just going to take myself to emergency, and I'll call you after I see a doctor. And I just knew at that very moment I had to get there. And I don't remember driving to the hospital, which is a very bad thing. But I got into the emergency and I went to the triage nurse and said, my husband just came in with a nut allergy, and there was a lot of commotion happening, in triage at that time. And she just looked at me and grabbed me, and I just knew something was wrong. And they took me back into emergency and opened the door, and Bain was still alive. And we looked into each other's eyes, and little did I know that that was the last time I would ever see him alive. And an hour, not even an hour, 37 minutes later, they pronounced him dead. And my life just absolutely changed. And I had to bring my 4-month-old baby to the hospital to say goodbye to this beautiful man that I thought was going to be the rest of my life. And I woke the next day, or probably didn't sleep at all that night, as I remember, slept in a generational chain of love with my mom holding me and me holding my child. And as Marina said, I woke up and I didn't know what we owned, what was going to happen to us. I was on mat leave. And I was fortunate my dad and my father-in-law went to the bank that day, met with the bank manager, and we had, I didn't own our house, Bain did. We didn't have wills. I wasn't on title of our house. We didn't have life insurance. At 30 and 35, we weren't thinking of those things. We thought we were invincible. And we did have mortgage insurance on our house. So that was the one saving grace for me, was that I didn't have to worry about that financial burden of paying a mortgage every month. But the burden I carried was that unbelievable grief of losing that person, my person, and a huge part of myself. And I do speak in my book, as you referenced, Ordinary Miracles, Life After Loss. I speak a lot about losing self in that grief, and not being able to move forward without managing that. And a massive message in my book to everybody is, in any type of grief we're dealing with, is allowing yourself to feel it. Because when you're going through something like the loss of a spouse, the loss of a parent, grief comes in so many different ways. And I know Kathleen touched on that as well. It can be the loss of your person, it can be the loss of a friendship, a relationship, a job. But we really need to try and manage that. And I do speak very openly and and really just kind of peel my skin off in my book. And I didn't know where I was going to take this book from start to finish when I decided to write it in 2021, but wrote it quickly in 4 months because it had been writing itself in the background. It had been writing from the day Bain died to the first messages I wanted to share with people were: make sure that you have your financial security in order, have your bills done, have life insurance, get your name on title of your house, speak to your financial advisor. And these are things we hadn't done. And these are the things that a lot of people don't want to think about, especially when you're 30, 35, because you think you're invincible and you don't want to think of your person not being there for you. But my biggest advice is that we really need to focus on that for that moment in time. It's that go see your lawyer and get your will done. It can be a really simple will if you have a lot of assets at that time, but just have it in place so that if God forbid you do need it, you can save yourself. It was 5 years it took me to settle our estate. And a year after Bain passed away, I was driving through this little town. Wilkin was asleep in the car, and I saw this beautiful little house with the greatest front porch. And I thought, maybe this is what I need. Maybe we need to move forward. Maybe we need to find a new space and start over. But what it really did was open up a whole new chapter of my life, which was dealing with the estate, because I didn't realize through the grief and everything else, I had so many different things that I was dealing with administratively that I couldn't just go buy that house because I didn't.
So this was a ramification of you not having a will then?
Yes, because I didn't. So when you don't have a will, and I know that Mary's going to speak on this a little bit more because this was 2007 and a lot has changed where we are here in 2022. But when you without a will, I became the estate trustee without a will of Bain's estate. But I owned, the estate at the time. The first $200,000 of the estate go to the spouse, and the remaining is split between the spouse and the children at the time. Obviously, I only had one. But Wilkin owned a part of the house. So in order for me to sell, I had to go to the children's court to get approval on any offer that we got. So,
and we know how fast they move.
oh, for sure. Yeah, I would never sell the house, trust me. So not, on top of all the grief that I was carrying and a broken heart, I was trying to manage through all of this. And had we been proactive, had we put those things in place to just make sure that we had our financial security in place, that we had our wealth, that 5 years of added stress on top of grief, I would have been able to deal with my grief and not everything else on top of it. And so I do chronicle that in my book, but I also talk about our life, and we have a beautiful life. And I made a promise to the universe when Bain died that I would give Wilkin the greatest life I possibly could with what I had. And I have to say, I've accomplished that.
You absolutely have.
But we also, it was a story, as Kathleen mentioned, it's a story of the lost love of Bain, the lost love of myself, but found love. And I was very fortunate that I went through a time in 2012 where I dealt with a lot of anxiety. And I do believe that physically, when we're dealing with all that stress, our body holds on to it. And eventually we just blow and we can't deal with it. And I did go through that. I took care of myself physically, but I don't think I was taking care of myself mentally. and with the added stress of not having our affairs in order, and obviously the obvious of the grief and the unbelievable trauma my body was going through, I needed to stop and focus on me.
That
And
was
it's
one of the things that really resonated with me when I read the book, because we always talk about, isn't it important that along with going through all that grief, that at least you're not also dealing with financial woes. And I say it all the time, but I never really felt it till I read your book. And it was just remarkable the toll it must have taken on you. It really resonated with me.
Yeah, it really does. Like I often say, that grief becomes a part of who we are. So when we lose somebody or we lose something, it becomes a part of our core. And we have options, and we have, there's a lot of people that just push that grief so far away, then think if I just keep ignoring it, it's going to go away. But it doesn't. It slowly starts to percolate to the top, and it may be 3 or 4 or 5 years later that people are managing through grief. And at that point, it's gotten so deep into your body that it's having an effect physically and mentally. Or we can try and deal with, manage it, and bring it out our hearts. And I often say that, we have scars, and we have those visible scars, like when we fell off our bike, or, our brother threw a baseball at us and hit us in the face, or whatever happens to us. But these scars are invisible. And,
Yeah.
and the scars, these are the scars that we see ourselves in the mirror. And sometimes they'll weep, and sometimes they'll hurt, and they're always there. And even as I come to, November will be 15 years since Bing passed away.
Mm.
And I am fortunate because I met an incredible man who said to me, I am going to take your pain away, and I'm going to help you find that capacity of your heart. And he did. And I am so fortunate because I've been able to love and be loved by two incredible men.
Mm.
And I have a life that, if I look, and say I'm very lucky, people always question that. Like, you've been through so much, but I am a lucky woman because I did get to love Bane, and Bane loved me. And that was years of my life that was beautiful. And I just, I believe that Bane obviously wasn't meant to be on this earth for a long time, but boy, did he do a lot in his 35 years. And part of that was loving me and giving me the most incredibly beautiful gift a human being could ever have, and that is my son.
Mm-hmm.
And now my husband Mike has adopted Wilkin, and we have the most beautiful life. And I have my son-in-law Christopher, who's 17 years older than Wilkin, but as Wilkin gets older, that age gap gets smaller. And these are the life after loss lessons, and these are the, once we get if we have our financial lives in order, if we have those things in place, that takes away from that stress, and it may actually speed up the grief process. But regardless, the whole messaging behind my message for financial and support and all those things are so important. But my message for grief is allow yourself to deal with it.
Right.
Don't push it away, and remember to love yourself, because it's not a vanity thing. It's a survival thing. It's showing strength, and it's showing courage. And on the other side of courage, there is growth. And we all want to grow, whether it's, in our hearts and our minds. And so with the book, I really hope that it can help. And I know just from you guys reading it just means so much to me. And the words that Marina spoke, even now after all these years, bring tears to my eyes, because I don't see myself that way. But I did write the book for my own purpose and to help me. And it was super cathartic. And it helped me look back on things that I didn't even know still bothered me. And I chronicle my journal in there, which I read just before I decided to write my book, that brought back a lot of memories. And the first entry in that journal was 2 weeks after Bane died, and it was very painful and very hard to read. The last entry in that journal is how lucky I am to have found love a second time.
Yeah.
So getting that second chance at life and love. So there's a lot of message in there. But hopefully, I wrote it, if I could help one person with my book, that was my goal. If I could help,
I'm sure you're helping so many, and now you speak too, right? You've been speaking to lots of groups, and the book
in many
is
different capacities. Yes.
Yeah.
So working with a widowed group called Soaring Spirits International, started by a woman who was also widowed. She was widowed in 2005, and I speak at their conference every year. I'm also a mindful meditation coach and a Hatha restorative and kids yoga instructor. And I teach restorative yoga to men and women who usually they bring me in to teach people who have recently lost. So some of the stories I hear are so fresh, and they do bring me back to those days where it was so painful. But then I look back and I think of where I was then and where I am now. And I do tell people my story, and I do encourage people to read my book. Now, someone who's lost someone within a year, I think, may find this book a little bit more challenging than someone who's lost someone within 5 years, let's say. But it's written for everybody. It is definitely written for the widowed community, but I think it's a book that could really help anybody manage through grief and loss. And it is written in a voice and a sense of inspiration and personal growth.
It is very inspiring. I want to go back to Kathleen's comment there and sort of combine, how you came to the other side of it. But I definitely, I do look at things and go, how could we make it better next time? Like, so that's the purpose of this video, is to give people that sort of proactive reminders, so that what you went through, although I know it's not in vain, but like your example can be a gift to other people to avoid, because even though you came on the other side, I'm sure you would never wish it upon anyone, right? And because there was a few times in your book where, you had talked about like your inability to heal or your inability to move on at the time because of the things that you had to deal with. And in fact, although so beautiful that Wilkin was adopted, it took you, I think I read, it was like a year and a half more to get the adoption done, because of the fact that you had to technically refer in that process to the children's lawyer at one point. And that caused some sort of, domino effect kind of issues. So even that had an effect on the adoption, which was supposed to be a much more simpler thing.
Yes, I've had my fair share of lawyers and time.
Yeah, you went through 4 on your first, estate matter. And I would actually love to answer the question, because I think it's a valid question. How much did because Wilkin had to have a children's lawyer, right? Yeah. And did that cost have to come out of his portion of the estate? Did you have to pay for it, or did the government pay for it? And then my follow-up question to that is, overall, in a wild guesstimate, how much money do you think was lost, both for you, your estate, and Wilkin's estate, by having to go through this non-will, not on title kind of situation, legal battle?
To answer the first question, government covered the cost of the children's lawyer.
Okay.
And as I referenced in my book, we loved her, and we took a while to find her for him. And it was crazy for me to even think that now I had to get another lawyer and one to represent my 5-year-old. But anyway, I did. A guesstimate. My gosh, it went on for so long, Marina. I would say probably $40,000 or $50,000.
Mm-hmm.
And that was just for the the estate part of it. I mean, we went through probate, we went through everything else. So it makes me kind of sick to my stomach to even think about it, because again, a lot of it could have been avoided had we been proactive.
Yeah, it's pennies on the dollar to think of what the cost of a will. And we say that, but it's like you mentioned, everyone thinks they're invincible. And until they're not. And it's pennies on the dollar to get a lawyer and get a will and to get proper insurance coverage. You mentioned mortgage insurance, which thank goodness you had it, and thank goodness it paid out and your house was paid off. But personally owned insurance, you could have controlled where the money was allocated, and you could have had a lot more, ownership, liquidity, and control of that money, whereas the bank just secures the bank's risk, right? Yeah, that now, I guess you've
learned. Yeah. And if you look at the, obviously the difference in the housing market in 2007 and where we are now.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
I want to reference to that note, throughout your process in dealing with the children's lawyer, you had prepared spreadsheets outlining the expenses for the 4+ years of raising your son. The expenses were for the value of Wilkins' upbringing, and it had, all of that had come from your income and your savings, and you received a letter after all this time and all this stress, stated that you owed your 5-year-old son back rent for living in your house for Wilkins' valued portion.
Yeah.
And I know that eventually got settled, but the words in your book were, they were playing hardball, which is, yeah. Did you, and I think this is again, another valid question, did any of the raising of Wilkin ever come out of Bain's estate, or was that onus all on you?
The onus was all on me. When they finally did come to the final sort of value of Wilkins' portion of the estate, I think they took some of that spreadsheet that I spent so much time on into account, but it certainly was very minimal compared to I paid for everything, and went back to work as a single mom and had to put my little guy into childcare, which was heartbreaking because I was broken. And all I wanted was him, because he was my pacifier and he helped me through. I mean, he really saved my life as far as I look at how I was dealing. If I didn't have Wilkin when Babe died, I wouldn't have had that focus. I wouldn't have had that person to get up for every day.
Right.
So yeah, I don't know how much value was, but the value was that would have gone towards the upbringing from that part of the estate, but it was minimal compared to obviously the cost of raising a child.
Mm-hmm.
And again, childcare expenses, anything else that we incurred were not, it all came from my income, which
yeah. I think that brings up a good point, referencing to what you were just saying, Kathleen, which is that the entire value of the estate was in the house, is what I read. And could you imagine if you were unable to work? I mean, you shouldn't have had to work at that time. It was very stressful for you, but there's lots of people who are in situations where they literally cannot work or did not have the same level of other family support, and would have relied on selling the house at that time to have money to raise this child or children. I mean, a lot of people have more children, they have more disputes and stuff like that. So that could have been a lot worse in that regard.
Yeah, it could have been worse, but it was also still pretty tough, because when I read the book, I was still sort of shocked at how years later there was still so much healing that had to be done and that wasn't done because of all the financial stress, estate settling stress, dealing with children's lawyers. So there was still a lot of healing. And again, as a financial planner who I've not experienced this, I talk about it, but I don't live it, and I didn't live it. And it's really helped me grow, I think, as a planner and having these conversations with people.
Yeah, and it's a story that it's a story, a true story that you can use with people.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
This video, that what we're doing today is letting people know that as hard as it is, there are many advantages to having your financial security in place.
Yes. And you have the money to think about yourself, to heal yourself, to spend time with your children, to help them go through everything. Wilkin was young enough that it probably wasn't as devastating as it would have been if he was, let's say, 8, but still, he's a remarkable kid, remarkable boy.
Thank you. And he's still, as he gets older, and he'll be 15 next week, he is more and more like Bain. But the beautiful thing is that he's very much like Mike in personality, because that's what he knows. Mm-hmm. And when it came down to finally getting the adoption done, we gave Wilkin the choice of what he wanted his name to be. And in my book, the chapter is called "The Name of a Prince." his birth certificate is a mile long, and he said, I want to be named after all of my parents. So he's named, Arnold was Bain's last name. I'm Sage, and Mike's Dorman. So he's got all three last names. But that was his choice. And I think
I don't think he would have chosen anything else, because he just wanted to acknowledge and be fair to everyone and recognize everyone. And that's the type of boy Wilkin is.
Yeah. He's a beautiful boy.
And kudos to you and to Mike for that.
Thank you. I mean, as I said, when Bain passed away, my biggest promise to the universe was that I would give him the best life I could. And the title of my book, Ordinary Miracles, comes from looking for those ordinary miracles in your life to help propel you forward to a place of happiness and a place of love, self-love found. And those little miracles can be anything. I mean, on the cover of my book, there's a monarch butterfly, which is a big significant part of me and my butterfly. But those are the things that can help us move forward. So that's where the title came from the book.
Yeah. I'd like to touch on that mortgage insurance question, and maybe ask Mary, because I would say it's one of the main questions out there when people are starting their lives, buying their houses, they're in their 30s. I used to work for a bank. I know that they push that mortgage insurance, and I'm not saying it's a bad product. Obviously, it helped you, Margo. Mm-hmm. But Mary, I would love for you to explain the differences, the details of the differences for our audience. And then, Margo, I would love for you to piggyback on that and explain how having a life insurance versus the mortgage insurance in terms of its flexibility could have improved things for you. So Mary, if you could start.
Yeah, so for mortgage insurance, it's actually not your insurance. It is an insurance policy owned by a lender, like a bank or a credit union, on your life. So it protects the lender, not you or your family. And it also does not provide any payment to your beneficiary. So in other words, there's no additional liquidity that is so needed at the time of this dramatic change of your family, like death of a loved one. So it is generally sold on an increasing premium and reducing coverage basis. And it's often not properly underwritten at issue, and underwriting process continues after the claim. And you need to reapply for it every time you change your lender or renew your mortgage. So is it happened to you like this, Margo? Is it your experience?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, again, it was under Bain's name, so I wasn't a part of sort of the conversations at the bank, but when it came down to his passing and me, being able to speak to the bank, the assistance of my father, considering my state of mind, and just the tragedy and shock that I was in, it was very much focused, obviously, just on the mortgage and paying off what we had left on our mortgage, which wasn't a substantial amount, to be honest.
Right.
So
that's the other thing, is it reduces with the mortgage, right? And to your point, Mary, you have to qualify for it every time you're renewing your mortgage. And although it is easier to qualify for, there are cases where you would not qualify. So you are taking that chance as well. Yeah. And, wanting to use it in different spots, referencing earlier when I said, what happens if you didn't want to work or couldn't work, that insurance would have helped you not have to work.
Absolutely. It would have given me that, more time to focus on Wilkin as a baby and not have to put him in daycare when, as I said, I was grieving so much that letting him go to daycare was so difficult. And with the mortgage insurance, it paid off the mortgage, which wasn't, if I looked at it today, in today's today's real estate market, would have been probably much more important. But back in 2007, had we had life insurance, that policy would have been more substantial than what
like a person's income is not just paying their mortgage, it's paying for children's education, it's paying for retirement savings, it's paying for food, shelter, lighting, utilities, it's paying for vacations, it's paying for so much more.
Yeah.
So it's typically not enough insurance. And then you pay the same amount. I like what you said, Marina. You're paying the same amount, but the balance is going down and down.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
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 I love at the end that you bought a new house with Mike, which was fantastic. And then you said, I made sure that my name was on the title as 50% owner and that my name was first.
100%. There was going to be no other way.
And that was partly Mike's idea, right? Is that correct?
No, that was me being first.
Was your idea?
Okay. But we did, we were a bit older when we met, and we were fortunate enough to both have real estate at the time. So,
but this is also the lesson for you of taking greater ownership in your own financial plan, yeah. Which, in a lot of marriages or relationships, one person will often have that strength and one person lets the other person take care of it. But I would not want my spouse, for instance, making investments that were a higher risk than I wanted, let's say.
Right.
And so, but when I release that chore, that marital responsibility to a spouse, then I've abdicated that responsibility. And I just love that you actually came out of this very empowered financially. That's what I felt. You came out of it strong. You did. Yeah. And strong and responsible and yeah,
empowered in many ways, but definitely financially, and still have my own investment portfolio that I manage closely, and Mike has his, and we're always in competition to see who's got more.
That's a good one.
Right now I'm winning, so but yes, that is an important message too. Is there are a lot of women that don't know even how to pay the bills or where to pay the bills, and even if they're not paying them, it's an important thing to know. Like, okay, go, have your spouse, or maybe it's flipped and maybe it's the wife that's paying them, but go online and find out exactly where everything's being drawn from, and know what to do, because the last thing you want to do if something does happen to someone, whether they pass or whether they lose the capacity to do that financially, is knowing, where to go and who to talk to.
You don't want to leave them with a mess.
No, and I don't say Bain left me with a mess, and we had no clue
that
he was going to pass. He was young. He was a lot more ill than we thought, because we knew he had the nut allergy, but we didn't know that he had heart disease until after the fact. And as a repercussion of that, Wilkin, at a very young age, was being tested for nuts at Sick Kids in Emergency, and at 2, and was tested for 5 years under the care of the emergency doctors, because we didn't know.
Right.
And he had he had to go, and for 6 years he saw a cardiologist, because we just didn't know what health implications this was going to have on him. And thank God, and I mean, I'm not a religious person, but I just really think that the universe was standing beside me and helping me through this, because if I had a child with nut allergies after losing a spouse to anaphylactic shock, I would never have I don't think it would have taken me a lot longer and a lot more strength to get where I am today, having to worry about him every second of every day, because I would have after what we went through.
Yeah, I mean, you had to learn the most complex issues that even the most advanced planners would be challenged to understand in the most vulnerable and stressful time of your life. I did read the portions of the book where your body suffered for that. You had different signs that your body was feeling that. You talked about grieving earlier. I had read somewhere when I went through my own stages of grieving through different breakups in my life and stuff like that, certainly not the same, but grieving is grieving in different areas. And it was, I had read that there's different stages of grieving, and that if you don't allow yourself to go through those grieving stages, and whatever stage you stop at, stage 1, stage 7, whatever, is where you'll pick up again. Like, you're not doing yourself any favors if you try to ignore it. There is no such thing as time making it go away. You do have to go through the grieving process. And again, that was you know, there's all the money reasons as to why to plan, but it's that emotional thing about your ability to have grieved was stunted and limited and halted, and you had to eventually get there, which you did, and I love your overcoming of that. But I can't impart that enough to the public, that you're never going to avoid that. You're just prolonging that. So you're causing yourself that issue, that emotional issue, amongst many other, you know, financial aspects. But that's the biggest one that got me. Yeah. So with that said, Mary, you being estate planner extraordinaire, I would love for you to let us know about the important things you should know about getting a will.
Yes, I'm sure that Margo's story touches all of us personally and deeply, and we all have an emotional reaction to it. We feel compassion. So in recent years, I actually became a big fan and student of neuroplasticity. In simple terms, neuroplasticity is our brain's ability to modify, change, and adapt both structure and function throughout life, and in respond to experience. So why am I talking about this? So let's use Margo's tragic experience as a call to action to do what we can while we are still around and capable of doing something about life's uncertainties. So let's quickly revisit reasons why setting up the will and doing some proper planning is necessary. So in Canada, if you die without a will, you are deemed to have died intestate. And each province has their own set of rules called the intestacy rules as to how your assets will be distributed. Many people believe that if they die without a will, their spouse will receive their entire estate. If you have children, in most jurisdictions, this is not the case. Generally speaking, a surviving spouse will receive a preferential share ranging from $50,000 to $350,000, depending on the province in which you reside. And the remainder will be divided between the spouse and children. So before deciding you do not need a will, here are some common scenarios that might help you realize why you actually should consider creating one. The first one is no will, no executor. That means no one will have the legal authority to manage your assets until the court appoints an administrator. And the person appointed may not be the person you would have chosen. Next one, if you have minor children, a court will be required to choose who will act as the guardian. Your children will also have access to all of the inheritance at the age of majority, that is between 18 or 19, depending upon the jurisdiction, which is still very young. And in many cases, they are not mature enough to manage large sums of money. And also, individuals in blended families often mistakenly assume that stepchildren will inherit in the same way as a natural or adopted child, leading to many instances where stepchildren are inadvertently disinherited. And sometimes common law partners often assume that they will be treated the same as married spouse at the time of death. So depending upon which jurisdictions you live in, this may or may not be true. This means that your common law spouse may not receive anything from your estate upon your death. And in the event of a common disaster where both spouses die at the same time, a will alleviate the potential inequities in jurisdictions where the older spouse is deemed to have predeceased the younger spouse and avoid the need to probate the same assets twice. So also without a will, certain assets that you may have wanted to be kept for your family may have to be sold for distribution. Make sure the estate is properly funded. Permanent life insurance can be a great method to inject liquid funds into the estate. So these are just some of the reasons why it may be important to have a will. Writing a will allows you to take control over how your estate will be distributed. The bottom line is you can avoid a host of potential problems if you simply plan ahead. Hopefully, with a little awareness, those of you who do not have a will will start thinking about getting one. You never know when it might be too late. Back to you, Marina. That's my message.
Thank you. That is super helpful. You know what? I love John Maxwell, and he's known for saying that people change only when they hurt enough that they have to, learn enough that they want to, or receive enough that they're able to. And, the motivation behind all of IB Canada's videos and this women's group is not to sell products. It's to educate, it's to empower, it's to motivate, but mostly it's to agitate you towards action so that you can help yourself go further than you could have without that information, or help yourself in the way that, Margo had learned those life lessons. Stories like Margo's are unfortunately more common than we think. And I know, Mary, you had some statistics that explain that.
Yes, according to the 2018 Angus Reid report, 51% of Canadians still didn't have a signed will. So still 51%. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Margo, how does that make you feel?
It surprises me. It makes me feel actually a little sad, to be honest, because I'm not sure how this is a great way to get the message out, but how do we get that message out to that 51%? Because God forbid, someone in that 51% is going to go through what I went through. And I don't want anyone to ever have to live those lives that I lived back in my late 30s, early 40s.
Yeah, you give me shivers. This whole thing gives me shivers. Yeah. Anyways, we will get the message out. We will keep trying. We will keep pushing. And, we hope that hearing Margo's life story is your gift, and that it exposes the importance of hoping for the best of life, but preparing for the worst, which is the best strategy. And, you had referenced earlier, Margo, something very powerful, which is to face the hard stuff with courage and bravery, right? And to get it done. For that inevitable mortality, there is only one guarantee in life, and that is death, right? And so let's not ignore it. Let's be responsible. Let's approach it with courage, and also love and care for the people that we'll leave behind. But I'm going to leave it there. But before I do, Margo, please, where can we find your awesome, lovely, beautiful book?
Oh, well, thank you. On my website, so at margosage.com, right when you go on that page, there's a link to Amazon, and it will take you right to the page on Amazon to purchase the book. So thank you.
Amazing. Well, I know for me, I'm going to make sure that my husband has a stack of them to give them as a gift to clients, because I think that would be a beautiful gift. So thank you so much for joining us, ladies. I really hope that this was helpful, and we'll talk to you next time.
IB Canada Group, your independent authority for information on the infinite banking concept.